in the small, sleepy town of Ashford, where the air was crisp and the streets echoed with the sounds of rustling leaves, there lived a man named Benjamin. Ben, as everyone called him, was a simple man, kind-hearted and fiercely loyal. He lived in a modest cottage on the outskirts of town with his faithful companion, Duke, a handsome golden retriever. Duke had been by Ben's side for years, through thick and thin, and their bond was unbreakable. But little did Ben know, the life he cherished was about to take a most unexpected and heartbreaking turn. One autumn afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the rolling hills, casting a golden hue across the landscape, Ben met a woman who would change everything. Her name was Sophie. She had recently moved to Ashford and had a mysterious air about her, with eyes that sparkled like stars, and a laugh that was as intoxicating as a glass of wine on a cold winter night. When Ben first saw her in the town square, it was as if time had slowed. Her beauty was undeniable and her charm irresistible. It wasn't long before Ben and Sophie were inseparable. They shared long walks along the riverbank, whispered conversations over candlelit dinners, and endless hours of laughter. Sophie seemed perfect in every way, and for the first time in years, Ben felt like he had found the missing piece of his heart. Duke, too, seemed to warm up to Sophie quickly, wagging his tail and bounding toward her every time she came over to Ben's house. She would pet him affectionately, cooing sweet words into his ear, and Ben found it endearing that she loved Duke almost as much as he did. But as the weeks turned into months, strange things began to happen. Ben started to notice that Sophie and Duke were spending more time together, without him. At first it was subtle. Sophie would arrive at Ben's house earlier than expected, letting herself in and heading straight for Duke. They would play in the backyard, Duke chasing after sticks Sophie tossed, her laughter echoing through the trees. Ben thought nothing of it, assuming she just adored his dog. After all, who wouldn't? Duke was as loyal as they came. However, soon the affection between Sophie and Duke seemed different. Ben would catch them exchanging looks, long, lingering gazes that made his stomach tighten with a feeling he couldn't quite place. Was he imagining things? Was it jealousy? He brushed it off, telling himself that he was being paranoid, that it was silly to think anything was wrong. But deep down something felt off. One evening, after an unusually quiet dinner, Sophie announced she had to leave early, citing an early meeting the next morning. Ben kissed her goodnight and watched her leave, but as the door closed behind her, Duke let out a strange, low whine. It was a sound Ben had never heard from him before. Duke stood at the door, his eyes wide and pleading, as if he were waiting for something, or someone. The next few nights, Sophie began leaving earlier and earlier, and Duke's behavior became even more peculiar. He would grow restless, pacing back and forth whenever Sophie was around, his tail wagging furiously as if anticipating something. Then one night, Ben woke up to the sound of muffled voices coming from downstairs. His heart raced as he quietly made his way down the stairs, careful not to make a sound. The house was dark, but as he neared the living room, he saw it. Sophie and Duke, sitting side by side, too close for comfort. Ben's breath caught in his throat as he watched them. Sophie was whispering something to Duke, her hand stroking his fur tenderly. And Duke was nuzzling her, his eyes filled with an affection that Ben had never seen before. His loyal dog, his best friend, was looking at Sophie the way Ben had once looked at her. It was as if they had their own secret language, one that didn't include him. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Sophie wasn't just cheating on him, she was cheating on him with Duke. It seemed impossible, absurd even, but the evidence was right in front of him. Sophie's late-night visits, Duke's strange behavior, the growing distance between them. It all made sense now. Sophie had fallen for his dog, and Duke, loyal as he was, had reciprocated. Ben felt a wave of anger, confusion, and betrayal wash over him. How could this have happened? How could he have been so blind? He watched them for what felt like an eternity before finally stepping forward, clearing his throat loudly. Sophie and Duke both jumped, startled by his presence. Sophie quickly stood up, her face pale, while Duke merely looked at Ben, his tail wagging as if nothing was wrong. "Ben, I can explain," Sophie stammered, but Ben didn't want to hear it. There were no words that could make sense of the madness unfolding before him. Without a word, Ben turned and walked out the front door, leaving Sophie and Duke behind. As he stood outside in the cold night air, the reality of the situation hit him fully. He had lost Sophie, but more painfully, he had lost Duke, the one soul who had always been by his side, his true companion. Now, even his dog had betrayed him. The following weeks were a blur of loneliness and heartbreak. Ben tried to go about his life, but nothing felt the same. Sophie had disappeared from town, and Duke remained at the house, but their bond was forever changed. Whenever Ben looked at him, all he could see was betrayal. In time, Ben realized that the love he had once shared with Sophie and Duke was a strange, fleeting thing, one that was never meant to last. He would never understand why it had happened, but he knew that life had a way of surprising you in the most unexpected ways. And so, Ben moved on, though the scars of that betrayal would stay with him forever, a constant reminder that love, even the purest kind, can sometimes take the most unusual and painful forms.